Hello everyone, welcome to the Cambridge Live Experience 2020. My name is Delia Kidd and I'm a Senior Research Manager at Cambridge University Press. Today I'm going to be talking to you about 5 communicative activities for the socially distanced classroom. Now, are you a teacher who has recently joined the classroom or returned to the classroom or is soon to return to the classroom and maybe experiencing some different layouts, different environment in the classroom? I'm sure this is true for many people as we have to adapt to the changing situation and return to the classroom, but in a socially distanced manner. In other words, we might need to create greater distances between our learners. We might need to be moving chairs and tables further apart. All sorts of different things that we might need to change about the classroom, which could have an effect on the way that we teach our learners and the types of activities that we ask them to complete. And this is particularly true for communicative activities. Obviously, these are really, really important types of activities for the language classroom. And so trying to overcome the idea of socially distanced learning for communicative activities is a bit of a challenge. So hopefully today I'm going to be able to give you some ideas for how to continue with your typical communicative activities, but in a socially distanced way. Now, these ideas come from a blog post from Jade Blue and is available on our World of Better Learning blog. And I'll share the link with you at the end of the presentation so you can go back and read more. I'll also invite you to share your ideas for activities for the socially distanced classroom so that we can learn from each other and know what's been successful and what perhaps hasn't been. So the first task then is a task called the noisy cafe. Now, if you imagine a noisy cafe, you've got lots of people kind of mingling, chatting, the sound level is quite high, and people are having to speak a little bit louder in order to get themselves heard. So that's exactly what we're doing here in the classroom. So this is what your classroom might look like. You've got learners who are kind of spread out. There might be about 2 meters between them. You've got your teacher in the middle. And so in order to conduct any kind of collaborative task in this setting, whether it's peer work or pair work rather, or group work, can be a bit of a challenge. So rather than moving the chairs closer together, you can get them to raise their voice in order to communicate with their pair. So let's say, for example, in this image, we've got our learners who on the left are student A and the students on the right are student B in their pair. And student A starts by shouting a question over to student B. And student B responds with their answer. And so here it's a very typical pair type task. It's a question and response. It might be the type of activity that you get learners to do in response to something that you've just taught, or perhaps it could be a dialogue practice activity. So there's really no change to the kind of essence of the activity. It's just that they're doing it from a wider distance. Now, obviously, this can get a little bit chaotic. You can have very loud levels of noise going on in your classroom, and if you enjoy that sort of thing, then that's great. But if you prefer a quieter classroom, then there are some other options rather than the noisy cafe. And one of those options is to use mini whiteboards instead. So here, rather than projecting our voices and working in group work that way, we give each learner a mini whiteboard in which they write their conversation. So here's an example. We have student A has written a question on their whiteboard. What are you doing this weekend? And they can raise it up in order for student B to see from a distance. And student B writes their response on their whiteboard. So, going to the beach, what about you? And they can raise their board up to the student A in answer. And this obviously has the benefit in that learners, there's no loud level, there's no chaos happening. Learners can write their message, they can erase things if they've got something wrong. So it's a bit of writing practice as well. But it can be quite important if you're trying to do this as a kind of conversation class to encourage that they use a conversational style in the way that they're writing. So that's also a benefit here, is that learners are really kind of engaging with what conversational style is and how to reflect that in their writing. A third idea, similar to this with pair work, is to use snowballs. Now, if you're a teacher of secondary particularly, you might have experienced learners doing this secretly by writing messages to each other on bits of paper and then kind of scrumping them up and throwing them over to their friends. So now we're encouraging this behavior. This is a way of communicating with each other via bits of paper. Now, you may want learners to wash their hands before they do this because they're going to be sharing paper. But essentially, this is how it works. Student A's on the left would write their message on a piece of paper and they would throw it over the room. Hopefully they have good aim, and throw it over to their partner. Partner would either write on the same piece of paper with their message back or write on a new piece of paper and throw it back to student A. Now, this is actually a really nice task to do if you're doing collaborative writing, perhaps like collaborative story writing, for example. So you would get one student in a group. Let's say we've got a group of 4. The first student would write the first sentence or the first paragraph of a story. They would then throw the piece of paper over to the next student who would continue the story with the next sentence or paragraph. That goes to student 3, to student 4, and so on. And finally, it returns to student 1, who can read the whole story out to the rest of the group or to the whole class. And that's a really nice way to encourage that kind of collaborative writing. And you also get some really hilarious stories out of it that way. So the fourth idea is conversation stations. And this is really good for collaborative thinking and getting learners to share their thoughts and ideas without having to hold a whole class discussion, which can sometimes have the disadvantage of some students being more vocal than others. So this is a great way to get every learner in the classroom contributing their own ideas in a way that perhaps feels more comfortable for them. So the way this would work is you would set up stations around your classroom. And depending on how big your classroom is, you could have more or fewer stations. And at each station, you would have a big piece of paper, big piece of cardboard perhaps, or a whiteboard, and you would put a topic or perhaps a question at the top of that whiteboard, which is what learners are going to engage with and going to respond to. And you can have a pack of post-it notes there, or you could get learners to write directly on the board as well with their answers. So in this example, perhaps learners have read a story and you're getting them to engage a bit more with the story by asking questions about the story and having learners contribute their own ideas. And so each learner would go to a station one at a time, and they would move around the room in that way. So there's never more than one person at a station contributing their ideas. So once they've finished at one station, they move over to the next, and so on. And you don't necessarily need to have all students moving around at the same time. You can have some students sat at their desks waiting for their turn to get up and move to the stations. And during that time, they could be planning their answers. So they could be there with their post-it notes, writing their answers, ready to take them to the correct station. So this is a really nice activity to get learners moving as well and engaging with the topics, and also reading each other's answers. And what you can do as a teacher at the end of the activity is take a look at the answers. You can group them. So if we look at the example of who's the best character in the story, you can see what trends there are in people's answers. Did some students think that one character in particular was the best. It's almost like a voting activity. And you can share the feedback with your learners. And the final task then is telephone cups. Now, you may be aware of this activity. It's very popular with young learners in particular to make telephones using cups and string. And it's amazing how it really works. So the concept is having 2 cups on either end of a really tightly held string. And when you speak into the cup, the sound vibrations travel along that string so that it can be heard on the other side using the other cup, just like in this picture. And so with this, you can get learners to perhaps make their telephones at home before coming to class, or you could do it as a little craft activity in your classroom. You want to use perhaps paper cups are easier, particularly with young learners. You take your cup, drill a little hole in the bottom of the cup and feed a string or a piece of thread through and tie it on the other side, or perhaps put a paper clip there. And the same thing happens with the other cup on the other side. And then when you're in class, you get 2 learners sat apart from each other to take each end of the telephone cup. And learner A speaks into the cup. Can you hear me? Sound travels along the string. And student B, yes, I can. So this is very similar in a way to the noisy cafe, but it's much quieter because learners don't have to raise their voice. They can speak at a very normal volume into the cup. And learner B receives this and then can return the conversation. And this is really fun, particularly young learners who really have a vivid imagination and they love to play pretend activities like speaking on the telephone. So this is a really simple thing that you can do with learners. And then you can assign a telephone to each learner so that when you have a paired task that you want your learners to get engaged with, then you can give them each their own telephone to reuse for that activity. So I hope you've enjoyed these activities and would like to try them out with your own students. If you do, please let us know how it goes. We'd love to hear from your experiences. We'd also like to hear from you about your own ideas. Are there any activities that you've used in your classroom that are socially distanced, that have been successful, that have worked for communication, and so on? So we'd like to invite you to go to this link here, which will take you to a idea boards, which looks like this. And you can see that I've added the 5 ideas that I've been through already today. So to share your ideas, just click the little green plus here and it will open up a new post-it note and you can add your idea there. You can also click into other ideas. So if you like a particular idea, you can click in and you can vote for that idea to say, yes, I really like that idea. And then we can get an idea of how many people have tried or like the particular different ideas. And if you want to read more about these, if you want to see the full article with more details about each of the activities that I've been through today, then this is the link that you can go to on our ELT blog to find out more from Jade Blue. So that's all from me today. Thank you very much. And I really hope you enjoy the rest of the Cambridge Live experience. Bye.